Today, we're going to talk about something super important to all woodworkers, sandpaper. By the end of this video, you know exactly what the numbers on the back of these pads mean and how you can use them to make your next wood project look amazing. So here's an interesting fact. When it comes to grit regulation, you're going to have two main types in America. The first one being Coated Abrasive Manufacturers Institute. The second one being the Federation of European Producers of Adhesives. The two scales are very close towards the bottom of the range, but as you increase in the grit number, the finer into the detail, the larger the skew that they start to spread apart. So some examples would be, in this one, we have a simple 80. Now that's on the American scale. Here, you see this P, now that's the European scale. The European scale has a tighter tolerance, so when it gets up in the higher abrasives, the higher grit number, when the abrasive itself is smaller, you'll see a lot of companies switch over to this. So let's start with the basics. When you look at the piece of sandpaper, you'll see a number on the back. That number is a grit number. But what does that even mean? Well, the grit number tells us how many tiny particles fit inside a 1-inch square. So inside this, it's 150 grit. There is 150 individual pieces of grit inside that square. Okay, but how do we use this information now that we have it? Well, most of the time, you'll need more than one grit size to finish your project. So here, you can see on this piece of wood, it's a very rough cut, right? There's flat grain here, raised grain here. So to properly make this flat, we need to run through the grit. So we'll start with 80, go to 180, and then 220. Now, 220 is just about as smooth as you need it to be to do any type of finishing, whether it's painting or staining, what have you. When you go higher, it makes the grain tighter or less porous, and then it's harder for the piece of wood to accept the stain or the paint, whatever you are doing to it. If you really want a super flat surface has zero imperfections, say you're doing epoxy work, you could go all the way up to 2000 or even more. Now, you may say, well, why don't I just buy 220 and start? That will actually take you a very long time. Okay, so when you're dealing with rough wood, it'll come out of the factory with saw marks. Right, so the way that it cuts, the saw blade's spinning and it takes a chunk, takes a chunk, takes a chunk, takes a chunk. Now, if you get a surfaced 4 sides board, it'll be completely flat. But this is what you get if you go to a specialty store that sells surfaced on 3 sides. So now we're gonna start off with our 80 grit sandpaper. And by using your sandpaper, you're essentially removing all the high spots. And you'll, depending on how far you go, now you're gonna start doing some divots. All right, so all this rough fiber in the middle is now to the same height as the rest of this board. Yeah. Next, we'll come in with our 180. And we'll create smaller divots. Now it's even smoother, but there are still scratches with this size grit. We'll finish it off with 220. And then finally with our 220, we'll have the shallowest divots. Super smooth. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please like, subscribe, comment, and even share. If you were looking for a little bit more information on the different types of sandpaper there are, go ahead and check out the next video.